Welcome back to my channel. Welcome to today's video. We have another monthly wrap up and I wasn't even sure whether I was going to do this video or whether I was going to combine it to June's wrap up, just because May has not been the reading month for me. It has not. I think we started off too strong. And you'll see why in a minute when I run through the books, but I think we started off too strong because since then I have been in the biggest reading slump ever. I will say that there are a couple books that got me out of the reading slump, but majority of the month was spent struggling. Struggling. I asked over on my Instagram whether you guys would rather see a shorter May wrap up or whether you'd rather wait until the end of June when I do my June wrap up and combine May and June's wrap up in that video together. But majority of you, by a long shot, I think it was nearly 80% of you said that you'd rather see a May wrap up video at the end of this month. So I thought, why not? And here we are. I have managed to read 6 books in total this month, but 3 of those are part of a series which we'll come to. So that's kind of why I wasn't sure, because I do think that 6 books is still a lot to read in a month. But for me, talking about them is not quite the same as 6 individual different books, if that makes any sense. But let's get into it. Let's get into my May wrap up. As I said, we started off the month way too strong. Way too strong. And this was just coming out of April, which was one of my best reading months I've ever had in my entire life. We came out of that month, I was thinking, well, let's try and keep this going. Let's try and keep this going. May might not be as good, but let's just, you know, keep it going. And I picked up this book and I was like, wow, I'm just on such a high, you know. And then reading slump came. But before the reading slump came, I read The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. I can't even deal with this book. I literally can't even deal. This is the second one to Once Upon a Broken Heart, and I read that, I think I read that in April. And the first one, honestly, to me, it felt like a fever dream. It felt like I knew what was going on when I was reading it, but if you had asked me to explain what was happening in that book, I couldn't tell you. I literally couldn't tell you. I think it's such a hard book to kind of pinpoint what it is. I can't sum it up. But this is the second one in that series, and when I tell you, I already had really high expectations for this because I'd heard that this was the best one in the series and that people read Once Upon a Broken Heart just to get to this book. So bear in mind, I already had high expectations already, but this did not disappoint. This did not disappoint. I cannot even explain the chokehold that this book had on me at the time. I finished it in 2 days and I was loving it so much that I was like, I'm going through this too quickly. Like, I need to slow myself down. I need to pace myself because I didn't want it to be over that much. And I literally couldn't pace myself because it was that good. And by the end of it, I was so upset that it was over and I felt so just empty and just couldn't believe that it was done. It was one of those where I was trying to slow myself down and then I just got so consumed by this book and this world, I couldn't stop reading. And then before I knew it, I had 30 pages left and I was like, might as well finish it. But it's just so good. We get more backstory of the characters in here. We get twists and turns and I can't even deal. And I'd say the plot of this one is more clear to the first one once you've read the first one, because the first one sometimes feels a bit all over the place just because it's setting things up and it's setting the world up and we have to kind of learn how Evangeline got where she is. But this one just continues from the first one and this one feels a lot stronger on the plot front, I feel like. But the ending of this one, gut-wrenching. Gut-wrenching. I'm still not over it. I can't even think about it, to be honest. And if I could have, I would have gone straight into A Curse for True Love, which is the third one. I believe that is out in hardback, but it's not out in paperback yet. It comes out in June though, which I'm so excited for. I'm so excited for. But this book was literally so good that I would have gone straight into A Curse for True Love if I could have. And best believe, June 20th, I am going to be reading that as soon as I possibly can. I just absolutely adored this and I rated it 5 stars, which I love it when we find a 5-star book. I love it. And this was definitely a 5-star book for me. And I'm hoping that Curse for True Love is going to continue being this good. So that was our first read of the month. See what I mean by we started off too strong? We started off too strong. And then the next book that I picked up was Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is the only Emily Henry book that I hadn't read at the time. I've read all of her other ones and I really wanted to read this just to see how it compared to her others. And if you've seen my most recent weekly vlog, I talk about this book a lot because I was reading it during that vlog. And you'll know if you've seen that how confused I was about this book because I have mixed feelings and I don't really know what happened. I don't know whether it was a me problem or whether it was the book. I literally don't know because this took me longer than it usually does to get through a I think it's 350 page book. It took me longer than it usually does, and I feel like this is when I started to go into my reading slump, because I literally cannot pinpoint what it is about this book. I really loved the characters in here, and I loved their backstory, and I felt like they felt like really thought out characters, and I really liked them too. I liked them individually, I liked them when they were together. I found that I just wasn't reaching for this book, and I wasn't really thinking about it outside of reading it. When I did read it, I was having a fun time. It was really cute, it was good, I was having a good time, but outside of it I just wasn't reaching for it, and I feel like that probably is the sign that I was going into a reading slump. I've also heard so much that other people have DNF'd this book the first time they tried to read it, and then when they came back to it, it was a 5-star read, which makes me think maybe everyone else is confused about this book too. Like, I don't know, maybe if I were to reread it, maybe I'd feel differently about it. But for me, it just felt like a very sort of slow book, and maybe that's not what I needed straight after The Ballad of Never After. Just in terms of, it's very character driven, and I don't know, it just felt like it took me ages to read it. And I think that partly has to do with the fact that these chapters are so long. They're like 20 pages per chapter, which I say this all the time, but short chapters are literally my favourite thing. I will read more if the chapters are short, because I always just think in my head, oh, just one more, oh, I'll just read one more, and I know that I can stop at almost any time. Whereas if they're long, I feel like I've been in that chapter for way too long. I'm like, when's it gonna pause, when's it gonna pause? And I didn't notice this in her other books, so I don't know what's going on there. I did enjoy it, I thought it was a really cute read, and I still would recommend it to people. And I ended up rating this 3 stars, so a solid read, but not one that I think I'll be thinking about outside of reading this. And really quickly, in case you don't know what this is about, this basically follows January and Gus, and they're both writers, and they basically both have writer's block. So they make this sort of deal with each other that they're going to write each other's genres, because they're both writing different genres usually. They have kind of a bet that each other can't write a book in the other's genre. So they basically decide to swap books, and to do that and to learn more about how to write in that genre, they take each other on little like day dates basically to teach the other one how to write in that genre and what that type of book needs in it. And yeah, that's basically the plot of this. There is a lot of backstory to both of them as well, like they have their own past that's slowly revealed as well, and they're basically just seeing whose book can get published first. That's basically the plot of this book, in case you were wondering. And then the next book that I read was The Yearbook by Holly Bourne. This is basically a high school YA read, and I did really enjoy this, but again, this was at my reading slump point, so I wasn't getting through it as quickly as I usually do, but I did enjoy it. I would definitely recommend it, especially if you like the books that feel like you're watching sort of a 2000s high school chick flick kind of movie vibe. That's literally what this feels like. This basically follows Paige, and Paige has always been really quiet at school, and she's kind of an outcast, and she basically gets put on working on the yearbook with a group of girls that are basically your mean girl popular type, and she kind of learns to find her voice against this group. But there's also a bit of a romance side to this book as well, and she finds some books in the library that have been annotated by somebody, and she's determined to find who's annotating them, because this person basically thinks the same as her and feels the same way that she does, so she really wants to find this person to be friends with them. So we basically just follow Paige navigating through her last year at high school, but also trying to find this person that thinks and feels the same way that she does. But what I really liked about this as well is that Paige felt very real, and there are so many relatable scenes in here and relatable thoughts going through high school, and she feels like a very thought out character just in what she's going through and what she's dealing with, and her home life and how she's seen at school, how she sees herself. She's just a very relatable character. It definitely felt like going back to high school sometimes when I was reading this, and she just felt like a very realistic character. I think that's what it was that I really liked, and I really liked the romance part of this, even though it wasn't very heavy at all throughout this book, but I really liked seeing that friendship kind of form and potentially turn into something more. Gave it a rating of 3 stars, so a very solid, cute YA book. And then we have the books that have basically consumed me this month. This was such a random book for me, just because it wasn't really on my radar, it wasn't on my TBR at all. I've seen the films for these books, and I literally saw this book on our family bookshelf and picked it up one day wanting to know what the first line was and just how that book starts. And I read the first line, and then I couldn't stop reading it. I literally couldn't stop reading it, and before I knew it I was a few chapters in, and I was like, well, I might as well just finish this book. And I will say that it literally got me out of my reading slump, because I couldn't put it down. I literally couldn't put it down, and that's The Hunger Games, which I've seen the films for when they first came out, but I never read the books. And I was actually thinking recently that I might rewatch the films, but then when I saw this I was like, why don't I just give the first book a go and see what it's like? And when I tell you, I was hooked. I was hooked, literally from the first page. And I'm so happy that I picked this up. I would recommend this even if you've seen the films. My camera died, but we're back. We're back. I can't remember what I was saying. I know I was talking about The Hunger Games, the first one. I just absolutely loved this. I loved it. I really enjoyed reading each book and then watching the film almost straight after. Like, I literally finished the book in the day and then watched the film that night. And I love doing that because I absolutely loved seeing what they'd done with the film and what they'd chosen to keep in, what they'd taken out. And I also am so happy that I read them because I feel like we got so much more detail and sort of backstory, and there's characters in here that aren't in the films. And I just feel like they could obviously explain a lot more, and you spend a lot more time with the characters, and I just feel like you know them better because you've read the book. And it was just really interesting to see how they'd taken the book and then obviously made it into the film. I will say that they are really good films for the books. Like, I was not disappointed at all. Even though I'd seen the movies a while ago, I'm still so glad that I'd read the books. I think this was probably my favourite in the series if I had to pick. I rated this 4.5 stars. I am kind of contemplating giving it a 5-star because it was just so good. It was so good. But I think for now it's a 4.5. I can't get over how fast paced and quick this was to read, and just how hooked I was from literally page 1. And after I read this, I literally couldn't imagine reading anything else because I was just so consumed by it and by this world that I literally couldn't imagine leaving those characters. So of course I went straight into the second one, which is Mockingjay, and this one did not disappoint. It did not disappoint. I really liked the plot of this one. Without giving any spoilers, I liked that we sort of kept some of the plot of this one and kept it going in here. I liked that, and I feel like we got more about the dynamic between the districts and the capital in this one as well, which kind of set us up for the third book, which I liked. And some of my favourite characters were introduced in this book, and I just thought it was a really interesting plot that was similar enough to this one but also different, which again just kept me hooked the entire time. And I ended up rating this 4 stars, so another really solid read. And then I watched the film for this one, absolutely loved it, and I think they did such a good job representing this book as a film, because some of the scenes in here I was kind of thinking, how are they going to show that in a movie? How are they going to do that? But they did it really well, and it did not disappoint, and it was exactly what I needed from the first one because, like I said, I just didn't want to leave this world or these characters. And then again I went straight into Catching Fire. I think this is the first series ever that I've literally read them back to back. Like Magnolia Parks, I read I think 2 of them back to back, but not the whole series. This is literally the first series that I literally couldn't put it down. I couldn't leave that world, and I genuinely couldn't imagine reading anything other than the next book in the series, which has never happened to me before, and I just think that's so crazy that that's happened. But this one I also rated 4 stars. This one's definitely heavier on sort of the politics and the war side of this world, just based on the history of the districts and sort of the dynamic between the capital and the districts and the revolution that's going on in this book. I think it's a lot more sort of politic based, but it's still really good, and there is still so much action in here. So much so that at times I felt a bit overwhelmed because I was like, why can I not imagine this? Because just everything was kicking off all at once. And I actually read the first half of this. I think it's up to chapter 12 and a bit into chapter 13 that the first movie is. So Catching Fire is actually split up into 2 movies, part 1 and part 2, and part 1 is up to chapter 12, a bit into chapter 13. And when I got to around chapter 15, I actually double checked this, and then I watched the first film while I was in the middle of this, and then when I read the second half I watched part 2 as well, and I really enjoyed doing it that way, just because in the films, because the films are quite long, they're about 2 hours each, and I think if I was to read this whole thing and then go straight back to part 1, I might have forgotten details or certain things that happened in the first part of this book, and I liked it kind of being fresh in my mind so that I could kind of compare the two and see what they'd done with the films in comparison to the books. I will say that there are a couple scenes in here that I wish had been in the film that were taken out, and I can completely see why they were taken out. I still really enjoyed it, and I think it was a really good adaptation of the book. And this book had so many things that I didn't see coming as well, and it just really caught me off guard. And how this ends, I can't even describe the way I felt. Like, I felt very like empty almost, and just some of the things that happen make it seem like not a satisfying end, but it is satisfying because there aren't any sort of threads loose and it's all like kind of tied together. But there's just something about it, I can't really say much without spoiling it, but there's just something about the end of this that I just didn't know what to do with myself. I literally didn't know what to do, and some things just didn't happen the way that I wanted them to. But I'm gonna leave it at that. This whole series I will be raving about for the foreseeable future because it has just honestly helped me get out of this reading slump, and I would genuinely recommend this series to anybody. I just think it's so good, and I'm so glad that after all this time I've actually read them. I know that there's a new book called The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I believe, which I think has recently come out, kind of recently, I think. And I really don't know whether to read that one or not. I know it's a prequel and it concentrates on President Snow, who's basically the villain in majority of these books. And I can't decide whether I want to read that one or not, so I'd love to know if any of you have read that book. Can you please let me know what you thought and whether it's worth reading and whether it even compares to the first three, because I feel like I don't know whether I'd like it as much as these because they obviously don't have the same characters in. So please let me know if you have read that book and what your thoughts on it. So for now I'm gonna leave it. I don't know whether I'm gonna go into Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I've absolutely loved this whole series and I would definitely recommend, especially if you're in a reading slump, because I think it does make a great series for getting out of a reading slump. I mean, it worked for me, so and also if you like Divergent series, because I loved the Divergent series. I read those books when they were released at the time, and I would say that if you liked them, you're gonna like these as well because they give a similar vibe. But to be honest, now after finishing the last one, I don't really know what to do with myself because I've watched all the films, I've read all the books, and now I'm just gonna go back to my TBR pile and choose something completely random. And that just feels really weird because this whole world and these characters have literally consumed my every thought for the past week or so. So I just think it's going to be weird going into another book and into another world. But I'm really glad that I read them and I would highly recommend. And that's all the books that I read in May, all 6 of them. I kind of can't really believe that I've read a literal whole series in this month. From start to finish. That's just crazy to me. But I'm really hoping that I don't go back into a reading slump, because you know when you have like a book hangover from a book and you just don't know what else to read and nothing hits the same. I feel like that's the position I'm in now after finishing the Hunger Games series, because I'm like, what do I do? What do I do with myself? What do I read now? So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that I don't go back into a reading slump for June. But I do have high hopes for June. I have some really good books on my TBR that I'm so excited for. So we're hopeful for June. Book of the month! Book of the month is something that I do in every single wrap-up video where I just kind of give a little shining moment of my favourite book that month. And this month it has to be The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. This was a really close call to The Hunger Games, as you probably could have guessed. But I think based on the fact that this was a 5-star read, and I literally think that this is responsible for the reading slump that I went into, I feel like it has to be Book of the Month. And of course it was a 5-star read, and I genuinely cannot wait for A Kiss for True Love. Please let me know in the comments what your favourite book was that you read this month. And that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you in my next one.